Welcome to the Jackson Rudolph podcast. I am your host, Jackson Rudolph, and this is episode 94, brought to you by the one and only, the legendary Black Belt Magazine. And ladies and gentlemen, do we have a show for you guys tonight? We are just over a week out from the Ocean State Grand Nationals. Anybody who knows me knows how important of a tournament the Ocean. Not only is it the Paul Mitchell home tournament, and I'm a bleed black and white Paul Mitchell guy from the day I started watching sport karate, but anybody that's tuned into the podcast, especially recently as we approach it, has heard me tell the stories of kind of the relationship that I built with the undisputed greatest of all time, Kevin Thompson, that started at the Ocean State Grand Nationals and kind of developed over the years. And so tonight on the show, we have none other than Kevin Thompson Jr. He's going to be joining the show. He is a great martial artist in his own right, so we're going to be talking about his martial arts journey as well. But I know all you sport karate fans want to hear the stories about Dad, so we'll get to those as well. But before we do that, we did have another hashtag JRP challenge last week. That hashtag JRP challenge was just to post a historic sport karate video. And this week's winner was the first guy to post about it, and that is Michael Brumet, who posted Kalman Choka's double sword form, the form that he debuted the double swords with. So Michael Brumet is the winner of this week's hashtag JRP challenge. And then for next week's hashtag JRP challenge, I want you to share a video of Kevin Thompson, since that is going to be a big topic of conversation tonight. So that is the hashtag JRP challenge for next week. But now we're going to get to the point because I'm super excited for this. Without further ado, let's go ahead and add him to the stream. We've got Kevin Thompson Jr. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show, man. I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit to everybody.
No, thank you so much for having me on the show, man. I've been a big fan of you for a long time, and the show definitely for a long time as well, man. My name is Kevin Thompson Jr. I am the son to, as Jackson already said with the great introduction, man, the greatest one of the greatest martial artists of all time that we've seen in this country. Currently, right now, I'm the head instructor of the Shakil School of Martial Arts, located in Bloomfield, New Jersey, teaching American Karate Do, none other than the famous style that my father, championed and took all around the world.
That's awesome. So again, thank you so much. And to everybody tuning in, if you guys have questions tonight, we're going to be flowing through a list that we've talked about. We got some great stories to share, even some stories that involve the two of us, which is kind of crazy. But if you guys have questions, absolutely drop those down in the comments. I'm going to be keeping an eye on it, and we'll get those questions from the viewers in there. But one thing I wanted to start with, and I told the viewers this already before I brought you in, I've been looking at some of your videos. You post some karate videos on your Instagram. You are a very skilled martial artist in your own right, and I highly recommend after this podcast ends, y'all go check out this guy's Instagram. It's The Life of Kev on Instagram, and you've got a story on there where you can actually click through and you see you doing a bow form, which I thought was awesome. So like I said, you are a very, very skilled martial artist in your own right. You're now running that school. You're a head instructor, CEO, right? So take us all the way back in your journey. How did this whole martial arts thing start for you?
Well, I guess you could say I came out the womb kicking and punching, right? No, my dad he's had the school since 81. I was born in 97. So obviously martial arts has been something that I've been doing, since I literally was born. I started directly at 2 years old. My dad brought me in the dojo. We had some kids classes. We call them the Mighty Mites. That's our 3 to 5 year old range. But I was already running around the house kicking and punching. I was at all he used to take me to as many tournaments as he could take me to, when I was first born, my mom, the rest of my family and I. So I was always around martial arts. So I had a really, really big connection. And I was always wanted to be like Dad. I knew my dad was my superhero. I used to watch him do things and just hear that he was doing things, even though, he was dad to me. But I still had that understanding that he was the man, you know what I mean? And him, with that handshake, and he let you know he's the man too. So I started at 2 years old. He brought me into the classes. I was crying on the floor. I didn't want to do it. Just much like, you see any other 2-year-old, come into a martial arts class where they're yelling and everybody's moving fast and you can't jump around and be, all crazy and everything. But, it was one of the best things, that my dad could have done for me. Put me into martial arts. And from there, I guess you could say the rest is history. I'm currently now 8th degree black belt. I got my black belt at 12 years old, 2009. I went through a 2-day test, one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. And, many of the black belts that we've had come through our system, have also attested to the same thing. Start out with 1,000 jumping jacks, 100 sit-ups, 100 push-ups, 100 squats, and then you go into all of the basics, the basic punches, stances, everything A to Z, and then you go through the katas and fighting, and then you got weapons, and then you got to read a paper, and then you got board. So it's, that type of experience, and getting ready for that type of experience, from such a young age, and then doing it and going through it at such a young age at the same time, it's put a lot into perspective for me. It's allowed me to mature beyond my young 25 years. You know what I mean? It's been a long 25, but it's very short still. So yeah, that my martial arts journey so far. Did a little bit of competing, man. I used to be out there looking at you, looking up to you, man, trying to get my boat kata just as good as yours was, man.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I love what you say about the black belt test, right? Because, man, that's the way it should be. And I wouldn't expect anything less coming out of your school, right? But the 2-day test, 1,000 jumping jacks, reading a paper, took you 10 years to get to your black belt test, right? I feel like so often today we hear about, I got my black belt in 2 years, and I did a 2-hour test for my 2nd degree, or, and it's like that right there, that's what it should be to get that black belt, right?
Tradition.
And I want to dive into your style a little bit more, because you mentioned that it's American karate, and everybody and their cousin says they do American karate, right? But
right.
Specifically with your school at Shakil's Warriors, and the way that your dad did it and that all of his disciples did it, the way that you do it, it is different, right? From the way you guys ki-ai, the way you generate your intensity, the way you move, the forms you run, right? The weapons that are a part of the style. So take us into some of the intricacies of that a little bit, kind of what your school teaches. I know obviously it's expanded beyond just the traditional. I see you posting clips of kickboxing classes, things of that nature.
Yep.
So kind of take us from the bottom up. What are kind of the roots of the system? What gives it that unique look? And then kind of the modern side of it and how you run the school today.
Right. Yeah. So like you said, and like we've been mentioning, we practice American Karate Do. Right. So simply the definition of that is practicing the art of karate as a way of life here in America. Right. Very, very basic. My dad was about being right to the point, so it's about taking karate and what you do in your everyday life, right, and being able to apply it. So not just the kicking and the punching, right, but also the spirit, the mind, and the body, right? That's really what we do when you say American Karate Do, right? Yes, we're not just in here kicking and punching and, doing katas and picking up weapons, but it's more about how we take that, right, and we apply it to what we're doing outside, right? So when we're bringing the kids in, right, it's about teaching them how to be good citizens, right, out in the world, leaving things better than they found it, right, being respectful to their parents, right, and their counterparts in school, right, making sure that everything is all good, A's and B's, right, that's always first and foremost. Got to make sure the mind's right, that was what my dad always used to say, right, when the body goes, you got to make sure you have a strong mind. So things like that, continuing to make sure that we're producing well-rounded people, right, every day. So that is at the heart American Karate Do. In terms of some history, my dad comes from a pretty rich line of martial artists in terms of his teachers. So his direct teacher was Kareem Abdullah. He was a very, very great martial artist. He created the KA system. That's where my dad gets his nickname, Lil KA. He was Big KA, so my dad was Little KA, and they were both out there tearing up the scene, when my dad was between the ages of about 8 and 13, 14, man, there was nobody that could stop him. He was, competing with adults and things like that at that age. So from the KA system, right? Kareem Abdullah, he trained with Master James Cheatham, right? And James Cheatham was one of the descendants of Chitoshi in Japan. So he actually was one of the people who got to learn traditional karate, right? Straight from Okinawa, right? And he brought it directly back here with a few other of the people that he was in the army, right? A few of his comrades, they brought it back and they were able to teach it. And we just come from that line. So we've taken the traditional karate, right? And we've transformed it into something that we had to use in a day-to-day basis, right? My dad was using the techniques that he taught in the system, right? Straight and directly from the things that he was doing when he had to defend his life, right? Newark was not Newark back in the 70s and the 80s. It wasn't a nice place, man. So he was taking a lot of these techniques that you see in the videos, right? The back smash, right? That hard reverse punch, right? That blitz even, right? A lot of those things, the sweeps, those were things and techniques that he took from the martial arts that he was applying in the street, and then he was bringing them back into martial arts, and he was making them even more effective, right? So it was just one big circle in how he created American Karate Do. So as you see right today, like you say, if you guys are able to, look at either my Instagram or you take a look at the dojo's Instagram, Shakil Warriors on Instagram, guys, go check us out, right? If you take a look, what you'll see is the kids practicing their basic stances from the ground up, right? It's always about balance to build up the body, right? You start with balance, and then it's all about self-defense, right? Karate is a self-defense. We don't want to go out and we're not starting to fight, right? We're always going to be able to defend ourselves and take control of the situation. That's really what we're teaching. So we're teaching blocking and then countering, punching, and taking control of situations, right? So that, and also some bullying prevention with the kids, and some after-school programs as well. For the adults, we're offering the same martial arts, but we also do a version of kickboxing, which we call aerobics, right? Karate aerobics. You remember Taibo? You might have heard of that, right? Taibo, right? We know Billy, right? Billy Blank, salute us always, right? Him and my dad, right? So just a little bit more history, right? Him and my dad, they used to be on the same team back in the day. I always forget the exact name. I don't know if it was the Transatlantic, Trans World Oil or the Atlantic National. It was one of those ones.
Yeah, it was.
They were the two captains, right? And if you look at both of those systems, the way that they trained back in the day, right? How was it? They were just punching, kicking in the dojo, right? Working on their fighting, and then they would just do calisthenics, right? Body weight, push-ups, sit-ups, little bit of weight. They weren't heavy in the gym, lifting a whole bunch of weights or anything, right? And that was how they came up with their programs, right? They came up with Taibo, Taekwondo aerobics, right? And then we do karate aerobics. So I teach a little bit of the same thing. We go through the calisthenics, the body weight, and then we learn how to box and kickbox a little bit as well. So yeah, that's the program right now, as best as we can put it. Yeah.
That's awesome. And that was like the perfect answer, tying in the history and everything. And it answers a question that I get all the time. Because, in the Paul Mitchell uniforms, we've got the hashtag KA Strong on social media posts. I put hashtag KA Strong, right? Yeah. And it's obviously for your dad, Kevin, right? Oh, yes, sir. And I get questions all the time of people being like, his initials are KT. Like, where does the A come from? Like, nobody understands it. And I'm like, because his nickname was little KA, because the instructor's initials were KA. Anyway.
Right. Yeah, and trust me, man, it's funny. Even when you ask me, you're like, hey, do you want Kevin Brown Thompson, Kevin Thompson Brown? That has been something that he's got probably less than I have, but I've gotten it so much more because growing up, and my dad was, like you're saying, he was a big name. And not just in sport martial arts, man. I couldn't walk down the street, go to a basketball game without somebody knowing my dad. So it was a thing of, everybody knew him. So, and they knew me. So when my friends would hear me, Kevin Brown, because that's my legal name, right? That was his legal name as well. And then, somebody from the martial arts world come in and they're like, hey, KA or Kevin Thompson. And they're like, who is that? So no, having to deal with those questions, have just been like, one of some of the facets of, kind of being in this life with, my dad, and that, living the life that he created, my uncle, his brother, his last name was Thompson. He's the uncle that actually got my father started in martial arts. So when he first took him and my other uncle, so it was three of them, when they first went to Master Kareem Abdullah, they were all known as the Thompson brothers. So it was Milo Thompson, then it was Earl Thompson, and then you had Kevin Thompson. So instead of it being Milo and then Earl Brown and Kevin Brown, right? They all just kind of went under the same name. So that's where that's where the Thompson comes from as well.
Cool. That's cool. And that's history that not everybody gets to hear, which is why I was so stoked to do this episode and get some of those stories.
Yeah.
Speaking of stories, you mentioned we're gonna focus on you now, because you mentioned you were coming around to the tournaments when you were a kid. You mentioned we competed against each other a few times, inevitably, right? And this is one of so I'm gonna tell a quick dad story, and then
No, yeah, go ahead.
This is one of my favorite stories that I tell, because it was the first time that I had ever met your dad. And it was at the U.S. Open. I forget what year it was, probably 2007, 8, somewhere in there.
Okay.
And you had forgotten your bow, apparently. And, he comes in, and I was fully aware of who he was, right?
Right.
Yeah, this is before Paul Mitchell. I'd maybe been on stage a few times, but I was not big shot, right? And he comes up to me and my dad, and just like as if he was anybody else, was like, hey, my son, he left his bow at home. Can we borrow one of your bows? I guess he just noticed that I had a bow case, because I always brought like this big fishing rod case full of bows, so that I had extras and everything.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there like, is Kevin Thompson talking to us? Like, Dad, do you see what's going on here? And then, we borrow a bow, and you competed with it, and life was good. But the reason I tell that story is because it speaks to his humility above all else, right? And that experience for me, like, imagine if you were at like an AAU basketball game, right? And LeBron or Michael Jordan was sitting there and was like, hey, yo, can Bronny borrow like a shooting sleeve or whatever? Like, that's what it was like. You know what I mean? It was just the craziest thing. But again, I want to tell your martial arts story as well, because that has its own twists and turns, right? So tell us about your days competing. And I guess part of that is, what is it like competing as the son that you were, right? Yeah. And just tell us some of your favorite stories from that.
Oh, man. Well, no, so one thing is, my dad always had me out in front of people. So from that young age of like 2 years old, he was always, you can ask some of the guys out there. So Matt, I know Tony Arango has this really cool story of me. I had went out to his house. He was having an anniversary dinner, and I was probably about 3 years old. I had just probably gotten a gi. My dad had these pair of foam commas that he had given me. And I didn't know, 3 years old, you don't really know what's going on, right? He brought me up, and my dad did a demonstration by himself, but he had me right there with him like he always did. And at the end of the demonstration, he pulled out the commas, he gave them to me, and he said, go. And I don't remember anything, but, everybody says I went out there and went crazy. They said I did a whole rollout, a little flip, a little bit of everything, man. And I turned it out. But from that story, moving forward, my dad started me a little late on the tournament circuit because, being of that caliber, he wanted to make sure I was ready. So he let me stew in the pot a little bit longer. And I went out there around about purple belt. So I went out, I started in the intermediate division. And, I did pretty well, taking between first and, second and third place most of the tournaments coming up and moving forward. But then I started basketball. So basketball got in a little bit in the way of me, traveling to all the tournaments. And not just that, but my dad only took me to the local tournament. So if we couldn't drive to it, I wasn't really going to it. So that was part of the reason I didn't have my bow. But no, man. And just to speak to that story alone, man, that was because I knew who you were. from just being from a spectator and, being in the division with you, man. You were a force to be reckoned with, even from a young age, man. And I was just hoping to be as good as you know what I mean, and be on that level and put out, to get to that level. So seeing where you're at, man, and seeing that you're still going, especially after, seeing where we started from, because like you said, you weren't on the team yet then either, and we were moving forward and we competed. So just seeing where you're at, man, just always big congratulations and big ups to you, man, on that. But yeah, no, I stopped competing. My last tournament was, when was that? I think it was, I don't know the year, but I was 12 years old. I think it might have been that, yeah, that was the last US Open, actually, the last time, yeah. So that was actually one of my last tournaments. I don't know, I forget what I placed it and everything, but I won the fighting division. And that was like that was a big tale, because that was my dad's thing. So, fighting, we always got it back in fighting. So that was it was a good way to go out. I wish I probably would have stuck with it a little bit more, but I moved on to basketball. I got a scholarship, so things kind of panned out.
You still got it, right? From teaching and everything. Like,
oh
yeah, I've seen those videos. If you wanted to go out there at one of these tournaments up in the Northeast, you could totally do it. But anyway, I'm not.
Don't tempt me, man. Don't tempt me, man.
And again, seriously, thank you for the kind words. That I'd never heard you give that side of the story, and so that's really cool for me to hear. And thank you, because that's special. Because when I remember that time, I'm like, no, I was nobody. You know what I mean?
You was doing it, man. You was definitely doing it back then.
So I want to get to, you've mentioned a few times that, like, when you were young and, your dad kept you from doing some of the bigger tournaments until you were older and it kind of earned it, right? Mm-hmm, so At what point did you realize who your dad was from a karate standpoint, right? Because everybody in the sport karate community, he was one of those guys. He walked into the room and everybody, their head turned, because that's who he was, right? So was there a moment? Was it you just had to get old enough to understand it? Like, when did you realize how that all worked?
It was almost so when I was younger, it was almost like your dad just being good at what he does. You know what I mean? That was how it kind of started out for, my perception. And then as we started to, do things more and, I'm at the tournaments and, he's getting older, so he's competing less at the nighttime finals, right? So you know what that looks like. So after you've done a few and you won a few, you can walk around and people are not really gonna ask you who you are, and so it was kind of seeing that he had that sort of access, you know what I mean, and understanding what that access meant, because he explained. My dad was very frank with me a lot of the time, so he explained to me how things work, you know what I mean, and who was bowing out to who and why, and you know what I mean, and just the respect and the level that he was at and that he expected, you know what I mean, because when Jordan had those championships, there was a certain level of respect that he commanded when he walked in the room, you know what I mean, and everybody gave my dad that level of respect, you know what I mean, and you saw that. Especially, once he got sick. So like, once he was diagnosed and everything, there was a lot of love, that was given out. And while I have this public forum, I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you to everybody who reached out, and sent prayers and donated, bought a board, broke a board, did anything that, went towards, my dad's fight. And it's still going towards my dad's fight. So even you guys just wearing the KA Strong uniforms, and continuing the legacy and what he stood for, and fighting and always standing up for your fellow man, and all of the good things that he came with. So thank you to everyone out there. That it really all of that meant a lot. But with that time came so many different people and stories, and you never really get used to coming home and seeing 3 or 4 different cars in your driveway every day. so over time, I didn't get used to it, but the love that everybody began to show and continued to show just kind of added on to the great person that he was, because he was a great person to people. He wasn't just the champ, right? He didn't just have all the trophies, right? He was a good people person. He was good to people. And that was one of his main things that he taught me, was that it's about people, right? People currency. So if you don't treat people well, people are going to treat you well, and you're going to have a harder time. So you got to put out well into the world to receive that. So that, seeing the way that he was able to go out, and live the last years of his life, and the people and the love that was shown to him, that was probably the biggest, as an adult, that I can say that is the biggest show of the person that he was. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Beautifully said. And I think part of what made all of it so beautiful was the fact that he got to witness that appreciation. You know what I mean? Because, to me, I got to see him compete relatively few times. I was very fortunate of the times that I did get to see him, but at the time that I was coming up, he was in the senior division and always on a mat on the other side of the ring, and
in another room.
I was able to catch a few, but where then when I was watching him compete, I was a fan. I didn't know him, but it was when his retirement tournament was Ocean State's 2011.
Mm-hmm.
The next year was 2012. I wasn't on Paul Mitchell yet, but I was on stage and got the chance to meet him, and we might get into that story later. But then later in 2012, I got on the team, and in all of our team meetings at Ocean State's over those years, where he had the greatest impact on me was his words, right? The way that he taught us, his famous speech from that first meeting about being your brother's keeper, right? That so many of the Paul Mitchell alums have shared when they were in the room and heard him give that speech, right? That, more than anything that he did on the mat, is what embodied what made him great, right? He was immortalized by his abilities on the mat, but he will be loved eternally for who he was off the mat. And that is what is so very special. And to bring things back, because you mentioned some of the things that he told you when you were a kid, right? Like explaining who bows out to who and how that kind of hierarchy works. That's first. I want to dive into that a little bit, because that's something that you don't really see much of anymore. Like, if team members,
haven't been out there so much. It's not out there that much.
Yeah, like you see the Corrali over in Hungary, they do it a lot at the Waco tournaments, right? Like especially when, I don't know if you're going to know some of these names or not, but like Zolt Marati and Laszlo. So when the Hungarians were like, doing their thing, they had a hierarchy, and certain guys bowed out to other guys, right? But really in the States, there's few teams that do that. Like nowadays, a lot, like if 2 JPM fighters are in the final at the Ocean States, as it's happened a few times, they'll do the fight, right? I've seen some of the next level guys I've seen bow out to each other, like James Poor, Tyson Ray, times in the lightweights. But it happens, but it doesn't. It's not something that's super common. So did you have more on that, or was that just one of those little things?
That was kind of more one of the little things. I know it's something that, him being him at the level that he was at that point, he was coming down from the 40 to 49 division. You got to remember, you got to look at it like that. So he's coming down from the 40 to 49 division. He's already beat probably 2 or 3 guys to get to the stage or get to wherever he's at, that he's seeing another JPM member at 8 who's coming out of that 18 to 29 division, right? So, depending on, where the fight was at, he would bow out to them. They would bow out to him to let somebody go say, hey, it's almost like in NASCAR, how the team members, they'll push one car ahead to, assure that the team gets the win, because sometimes it's better that the team gets a win, or the team wins this big tournament, or somebody has a better chance of beating whoever else is on the other side of the draw, because it's a team thing. At the end of the day, when you're on a team, that's why you're really bowing out to somebody. You're not bowing out just to let them have it.
Exactly. And it's the strategy of that is what I'm fascinated by, right? Mm-hmm. Because you mentioned it's because you're a team, and as long as the team wins, that's what matters. And that's what Paul Mitchell has preached for as long as I've been around, right? It's if the team wins, that's what we want. And if we wind up taking first, second, and third, that's even better. But the team winning is what matters. And so the strategy of saying, like, competitor A might be our best fighter, but competitor B is a better matchup for that dude from the other team who's in the finals. So we're going to send competitor B. Like that, I find very fascinating. So one of the big
ATM coach Tom Rodriguez and Chris, and oh man, those guys are awesome. Damon, Steve, those are some of the smartest IQ martial artists that I've ever had the pleasure of being around. So they're definitely the guys to talk to about that.
Oh yeah, no doubt. And so talking about these old stories, right? The one that I think Coach Rodriguez told it when he was on the podcast many episodes ago. Mm-hmm. But this is like one of the craziest stories to me, is that he said that he went to go visit you guys, and went to your dad's training room and everything. Right. Long story short, there was supposedly this like bucket of rocks that was in the training room, right? And the first time Coach saw it, it was just a bucket of rocks, right? And then he was like, hey Kevin, what is this for, right?
Right.
Your dad explained, like, hey, I strengthened my fist, I punched down into it, right?
Yeah.
And then, Coach a little bit was like, no, you gotta be kidding me, right? And then Coach tells, like, when he came back, I guess it was months later or whatever, he looked at the same bucket and it was all dust from where he punched down into it. And that is like the craziest thing. There's a ton of stories about the training that your dad did. So you were on the inside of that, right? So tell us, what was that training regimen like? How much of it did you see? And what are maybe some other crazy stuff that he would do to stay on top?
Yeah. Well, he was very meticulous. And while I wasn't, he had a few levels in his life where he trained for specific things, right? So, at one point when he was creating the system, he was in a mode, and I hear stories about that every day. I get calls from black belts, that trained with him back in the day, even just old students. I see people, and you ask them about him back then and how he trained. They would say he was a madman. He'd come in the dojo, class was 3 to 4 hours, right? You went through that black belt test that I just told you about that we did in 2 days. You do that in the 3 or 4 hours. You understand? So that was how he trained, right? Pedal to the metal. It didn't matter what was going on. He was training like it was life or death, because, like I said, American Karate Do is practicing our karate as a way of life. So he wasn't just training for the tournament, right? He was training for life. Right? He was training to go not just to the tournament on the weekend, but he was a vice principal in one of the most dangerous schools in America at one point. Right? So he's going in the school, and he's having to have physical altercations with students that are much bigger than him, because remember, he's 5'5". Right? And he's in a high school. So you got 6'6", right? And big guys, and he's literally still having to fight people for his life almost. Right? So when he's in a tournament, some of those techniques, are coming a little hot, right? But I mean, in terms of the training, what I got to see was a guy who knew everything that he did at such a expert level, and knew his body at such an expert level that it was almost just like watching someone tune up a car fine tune a car, right? You don't see them doing a lot of work, right? But at the same time, everything that they're doing is so vital to making sure that that car is running at tip-top shape, right? So what Coach saw, right, when he went and the room was no bigger than the room that I'm sitting in now, which is about 8 by 10, right? Had a little mat on the floor, and we got our kicking bag, our punching kicking bag, that's our water bag that moves up and down, slides on the floor, and a mirror that's sitting on the ground. And in that room, he would go over his kata no less than 10 times. All of them, top to bottom, right? Whatever kata he's planning on, right? And he normally had about 3, right, that he kept in the tuck. But like you fine tune a car, you don't got to go over all 3, right? You go over the ones that that you gotta make sure that you're sharp on, or you're practicing a certain move, right? For hours. You go down. My mom and my sister and I would go to church on Sunday morning. And he was Muslim, so he'd be home, and he would take that as his alone time to train. And we'd come back, and we hear the music going in the basement, and all you would hear is this, right? And that was that bucket getting pounded, man. You hear the whole floor, the whole house shaking, man. Boom, boom. And you go down and you see him, right? In between his sets, he'd be punching the pail. And what was that doing? He was getting that callus on that knuckle. Because if you looked at his hands, you ever shook his hand and looked at that hand? This knuckle was black. Like it was calloused up. If you caught him on the wrong, if you caught him like right after that, it was probably bloody, right? And probably had a little scab on top of it. But that was how he trained, right? Like I said, fine-tuning the car, making sure that he had all of his tools ready at all times, right? He practiced his weapons all times, sharp, right? He was always really training if you really think about it. He would do things like, say I got this water bottle right here. He would snap at it, right? And work on his control and see how close he could come to it. So instead of using the water bottle, he used my head. So he'd be snapping at my head all day with his knuckles that are like rocks. So I'm like scared and I'm flinching. And so like he was always doing something, you know what I mean, to make sure that he was at his best.
That's awesome. Yeah. Like that side of it, like hearing the confirmation that like, oh yeah, we'd come home and he was downstairs punching the rocks. Yeah. Like,
oh yeah.
Like that's
it's still there. It's still. I wish I was home to show you, man. I wish I was home. If I was home, I would literally go grab that. It's dust. It was dust, man. And I remember because we moved into the house, and my grandmother, she threw it out. She threw out the old one. We moved into the house when I was like 5 or 6. She threw out the old bucket, and he had to get a new bucket. And we've had that one. So now that one's been there for going on about 18-ish years. And that one is sand.
Hey, you got it. When you get home, send me a picture of that, and I got to get that posted on the page.
Yeah, no, I definitely will.
And one thing that you've mentioned a few times that, if you never had the opportunity to meet Kevin, you wouldn't know this, the handshake. The handshake, for anybody that met him face to face, is like the number one thing people talk about. Because, like, realistically, he was probably, and I'm not exaggerating, the strongest pound for pound human that I've ever encountered in my life, right? And so when you would shake his hand, you would literally, like, you would feel the bones in your hand move closer together.
Yeah,
you would squeeze that thing.
Man, the grip is legendary, man. I've had friends, coaches, teachers, everybody, man. Everybody that's one of the main things that, they remember my dad by. And I'll tell you, punching that pail was part of that regimen, keeping that hand solid and tight all the time. And one of the other things that he always carried around was he had a foam grip that he walked around, and he would always squeeze both hands. But, it was little things that he did to strengthen the little parts of his body, right? That when you looked at the big picture, you're like, whoa, You know what I mean? Because he was a little guy, and like I told you, he didn't lift weights. But if you look at all these, there are pictures around here. There are a couple of pictures that I have hanging up on the wall over here. You look at him, and you would say, "There's no way that that guy's not in the gym lifting weights for 2 hours a day."
Right.
You know what I mean? But that was the amount of push-ups, the amount of sit-ups, the amount of squats, dips, pull-ups, right? The amount of things that he did, and the time frame that he was doing it for, you know, and at the level that he was doing it at, that, you know, showed just the work. He always used to say, one of his famous sayings was, "You get out what you put in." And, you know, you saw what he put in right to the T every day, you know?
That's awesome. That's awesome. I could go on about these training stories like forever because there's so many good ones. But now I want to take it from, by the way, I'm going to go ahead and show this. We got Jesse Ray in the comments saying he gets nightmares thinking about that handshake.
Oh yeah, man. The handshake is a handshake, a headbutt, and a left hook to the ribs.
For sure. So now I want to move on from the training to the competing. And you sent me a couple of videos ahead of time that we're going to showcase. We got a fight and then a performance. So I'm going to go ahead and get the screen share going here. And I'm just going to kind of let you go and tell kind of the story of you know, these performances. We're going to start with the fight here. Give me a second as I navigate technology here. There's a reason I did karate and not IT. Share screen, and we're going to go right here. We're going to share that. We're going to go full screen on it. All right. Let me make sure that's showing up. Okay, perfect. We're good. So I'm going to hit play, and then I'm just going to let you go, man.
Yeah, no, this is just this is one of my favorite fights from my dad, because it just showcases a lot of his skill, you know. But also it's a monumental fight because I actually had the chance of, just like you and everybody else that's out there, having a fangirl moment, having both of these guys. The other guy is Billy Beeson, one of the other most, you know, prolific fighters back in the day, and you see how they throw it down, man. And I had the honor of being in the room when Bill presented my dad with this fight, you know, after my dad got sick, and they went at it from their perspectives, blow for blow. And it was awesome, man. You know, seeing what they were both thinking in moments like this, you know, where that left hook gets thrown and it connects, and one's falling and the other one's getting a little more juice, as you see. So, being able to see some fights like this, and, you know, just these were some of the fights that when I tell my friends, I'm like, my dad's that guy, man. You know, he's Mike Jordan in karate. You know, that's what he does. They're like, oh nah, and I'm like,
proof's in the pudding, right?
Exactly, man. Exactly. Give me one. Okay, can you run and grab my backpack and grab my charger? Thank you. Just want to make sure my laptop doesn't die. Right. But yeah, no, and you see, this is just one of, you know, really, really good fight between the both of them. Just a little backstory. This was actually one of Bill's last fights, and in true, you know, warrior fashion, right? In his retirement, Bill actually, the belt that he's wearing, he framed it and put a picture of it up, and, you know, gave it to my dad, because they were the two top competitors at the time, and Bill and my dad were, you know, pushing each other. So when things like this happen, you know, it sucks to go out, but, you know, you see the love in the end, right? And it just shows in, you know, him being able to come and show my dad and give him this and explain and talk about it. You know what I mean? But no, like I said, my favorite video, because, as my dad would say, he taxed that butt a little bit.
That's awesome. I wanted to rewind, man, while you were in the middle of that. There was a spin hook kick here.
Oh, yeah. The spinning axe. That's the spinning axe.
It was insane. It was a spin axe.
Yep, the hooks, a little tie. Yep, boom, boom. You see the movement, man. Light on his feet.
Okay, yeah, it's after this. So he goes
Yep,
off
right
stage.
after
I
this,
love
yeah.
like the way he like
So
comes
you see, he got the bouncy on his toes. Axe kick, right?
Oh,
Spinning
that's
axe
so
coming. Boom, landed.
and then I love the celebration
Oh,
too. You know what I mean? Like you don't see that enough anymore.
it's vintage, man. You want to talk about all that? You want to talk about Jordan, right? Jordan-esque is vintage like that.
I love it. I love it. So there was the fight with so many highlights in there. Now we're going to switch over to the form, which again, forgive me for those of you tuning in. It's going to take me a second. Here we go.
Yeah, no.
And right there. So we're going to share that. We're going to make that full screen.
Yeah.
And here we go. So this looks like Waco World Championship, Venice 1990, which is crazy.
Man. This is like in the pretty much, yeah, this is pretty much his prime. He's at this point at the height of everything. He's traveling around the world. I believe I actually was able to. I was going through some of his stuff. He was like a dinosaur, man. He kept everything on paper. Everything was written down, dates, everything to the T. As if we use the way we use our phones and we keep notes and dates. He wrote it all on paper. So I actually was able to see where he was at during this time. So he was like traveling around. This was actually in Europe. I don't know where in Europe the actual tournament was at because there were a few that he went to, but this was in Europe, and he was doing shows and seminars around this. So he was traveling to different countries, Venice, Austria. He was going to Germany. He did Italy, right? And he was giving fighting weapons and form seminars to people around the world, man. So I think this video, the iconicness of just what he's doing right now, sitting down, taking the time to fold up the uniform and doing the form with the shirt off is something that didn't happen back then, and I think it very rarely happens now, you know what I mean? So just kind of seeing how he does this and, just the legend status of what he's doing, man, and look at him cut. Like I said, that's calisthenics, man. That's push-ups and sit-ups and some dips and some pull-ups. Like he wasn't doing a whole lot of extra stuff. So yeah, man, you sit back and enjoy and you just see the power and the grace, right? With the kicks, the spins, the right back, the stance is on point. Like I said, he would practice these moves for hours and hours on end and just be able to do them, flawlessly. The kicks, everything, man. Just a true martial artist to the T of it, So yeah,
And what I love about watching his commas is he goes in and out of like, notice some of the trend, like right there, like almost like little dance elements, right? Yeah. As he get into it with the music, and then like super traditional bottom of the grip with the bottom grip with the commas,
long
traditional
commas
comma cutting, and then into like the extreme stuff, the jump kicks, like the way he flawlessly stitched all of that together is unlike anybody else I've ever seen.
Yeah, and that was the revolution in who he was and what he did. With that right there. So like things like that back then, people weren't doing. And if you let the music, if you let the sound go, you would hear the song. You want to know what song he's doing, man. You don't know the song he's doing.
Was it smooth? I know you use Smooth Criminal a lot. But...
Billie Jean. No, Smooth. Yeah, it was Smooth Criminal. Yep, that's what it was. Smooth Criminal by Michael Jackson, man. He's doing that to Smooth Criminal. So like that, like I think if you really like when you asked me for two videos who describe who my dad was and some things that remind me of just the competitor and the person that he was. Those two videos remind me directly of who he is. Like you said, the dance moves, looking in and out of the actual hard traditional karate, right? You see the stances, but the grace and the pivots, and then right into the kicks and the spins and the turns right into the flip, right? So like all of that flawlessly put together with style. right with the Michael Jackson.
And that's the thing. It was so ahead of his time. Like the charisma that he brought to forms. I mean, really, when you talk about just straight ability to perform, I don't know there's anybody that even comes close when it comes on to putting on a show like he could. You know, like in the modern era, we see, dude may get up there and yell a lot, but it's like the way that he was able to put on a show was just different. And you're right about the way that the music just, it worked. You know what I mean? Like I know that he used Smooth Criminal all the time. And what's kind of cool is, this is a story that I haven't told anybody, because a lot of the things that I did for him at Ocean States was obviously very public, because that was the best way for me to communicate that, was through the performance directly.
Right.
And it was because, he was there seeing it happen, and that's the reason that it was so public. But one of my favorite Kevin moments to me was it was Compete Nationals, which was in February, right after the January that he passed.
Okay.
And Steve Babcock was the only one who knew what I was doing. And it was Saturday afternoon, and I decided that I was going to use Smooth Criminal. So I literally got on my phone and like put together like the most like jank remix and tried to like make the timing work and everything.
Right.
And then everybody in that room, because this was 2020 and I was using Smooth Criminal, right? So everybody in that room had to be thinking,
what's going on? Yeah.
And but I was doing it because it meant something to me, because I knew what that song was from, right? And so like, Steve Babcock was, I've never told this story. Steve Babcock, too, right now, was the only person that knew that. And I was like, Steve, I want you to, and I didn't even tell him beforehand. I was like, I want you to listen to the music that I'm going to use tonight. And I'm going to talk to you after the show, and you tell me where it came from.
Right. Yeah. Did he guess? Did he guess right?
Off stage, he was like, "That's KA's song, man." I was like, exactly. Anyway, no, it's that was the impact that he had. That that was 1990. 30 years later, that inspired me to do what I did with that form. You know what I'm saying? That influence is immeasurable, right? And so the next thing that I want to move to, I've got I'm going to be honest with the crowd here. I got a whole list of things that I wanted to ask, but I know we're getting close to wrapping things up here because we've been going a while. So we covered some of the forms. Oh, easy one. Anything else? Like, is there another story? Like, if you had to pick one other story that we haven't touched on yet, that is just like, I got to share this story, what would that be?
Well, I mean, not necessarily a story, just kind of to go with more the, we're talking about how iconic he was, and just the things that he did that inspired people. It's kind of, it's funny. He used to have a uniform. He had a gi. There's probably it's on you. It's definitely on YouTube. He's wearing it. But he had gis that he had a gi that was tiger print, and he had a gi that was leopard print. And oh man, they're beautiful gis. My grandmother actually she sewed them together herself. And he competed in those, and those were some of the most iconic times that he has been in a martial arts uniform. Some of those shots, he has shots of him outside in the woods, with the commas, 6 o'clock kick straight up in the Jaguar pants, man. No shirt on, frayed belt and all. Like, it's just like, you want to talk icon and legend, and doing things that you don't see every day, and that you don't think about when you think, oh, martial arts, right? Just things like that. He's inspired so many people, and pushed the bounds and the limits of the tradition, right? And that's really what he stood for, pushing the limits of tradition but at the same time keeping everything in the forefront. One of his most famous sayings was, always respect the womb from which you've come. right? And that was something that he did to the very, very, very end. He respected the people that came before him and all the people that helped him get to, where he got to. And yeah, no, just paying homage. So those would be some, I would say, some of the biggest things that I would definitely that I didn't get to really touch on. Yeah.
It reminded me of one. You talking about the pants, and I was thinking about some of like the iconic images of him,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And the one that stands out to me is, in the Breaking Through ALS with Kevin Thompson video the Century made, right?
Yeah.
Which for some reason I was lucky to be in that video. I was like, you talk about it? Sure, I'll talk about it. But like, I cherish the fact that I had the opportunity to contribute to that. But there's a clip in that video where it's showing trophies and pictures and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then it goes to the mask, right? And I think I've seen the video of the form that he wore it for maybe once or twice. I think you got to do some digging to find it. I've never heard the backstory. Yeah, I'll give you a second.
Can you go grab the mask out of the room? And I got somebody coming. Just open the door for me. Thank you.
That's awesome. But I've never heard that backstory. What's the story?
Yeah, so the mask. So really what happened was he had gotten his nose broken once. And my grandmother was like, come on, you gotta protect the face, and you know how that goes, right? So it was one of those situations. So the mask came. He decided to wear the mask. And it was something that it really stuck. It was especially when he was a kid, he used to go around and another Anthony Arango. He has a lot of stories for me, man. Anthony Arango used to say my dad, intimidation was a big factor, especially back in the day. So they won a lot of the fights before they even bowed in. So he would wear the mask and he would walk around with his big butterfly hook knives and he would cling them together and, and kind of intimidate someone. Imagine being 10 or 11 years old and seeing somebody walking around with the Jason hockey mask. Little kid too.
That's awesome.
So little things like that. But, the mask was iconic. So after a while, it was something that he wore, because that was him. And, it did put that, put that little bit of, a little fear in the opponent sometimes. So it was also a little bit of an edge.
That's awesome. I love that. I love that. That was like the best backstory ever. There it is. That is awesome.
Yeah, man. Got all the memorabilia right here.
Awesome. There's, I always, I have this conversation with like some of my buddies and everything. Like, if you could purchase any piece of sport karate memorabilia, what would you pay the most money for, right? That's on the list. And then the other one that's actually been shown on the show before is we actually did one of these shows from Steve Babcock's school.
Okay.
And in Steve's school, he's got the gloves that your dad signed with your dad's Rolex from the Bluegrass on the wrist of the glove.
On the wrist of the
I'm like, that pair of gloves with the Rolex
on? For real, yeah, with the Rolex.
Anyway, but yeah, there's so many. Like, at some point, you guys got to open like a museum where like people can come and see some of the stuff, man.
That has been one of the things that I have taken charge of, and just kind of coming back and taking over the school, just keeping the legacy alive as best as we can. And just sitting here in the hour that we've been on, we've probably told a whole movie's worth of stories, you know what I mean? And it's, one of the things that I'm doing is taking pride in just documenting that and keeping that alive. So like, if you see, even, I'm in the dojo right now, this is our back area, our kids get dressed back here, but this is just let me keep it straight, some of our history, and some of the people that have been here and been able to grace the floor. So, everybody can see, not just what my dad has done, but what the people who have been through these doors, because we've been open for 40 years. We've been affecting the community for 40 years, since 81. So, being able to do that's really what that's been my mission, coming home to keep the legacy alive and continue to affect the youth, in such a monumental way to make sure that the next generation, right, is just as productive and greater than, what all the things that we've done. So that's been one of the biggest things. So yeah, I want to start a museum. We got parts of it right here. Like I said, I got the mask. We got, look, the trophies as best as they can, they holding on. But you know how those trophies do, man. We got trophies from like the 70s and the 80s in my basement right now, just kind of holding on by the last thread of dust that they got to them. So, definitely thinking about that though as well.
And it's a perfect segue. You talk about, what the school represents today and kind of your mission with it. And, I think back on this and I'm like, what you guys teach produced the greatest sport karate competitor of all time, right? So, do you get your guys out there and have your kids competing in some of the tournaments around there anymore? I mean, do you guys compete much, or what's the vibe with that around there?
Yeah, so we actually do have a few kids. I send a few kids out there to compete here and there. Right now, since COVID started, I kind of pulled everybody back in, and we've been taking a step back. But we've been having some competition and some demo team practices. We've always had a demo team, so we've gone out and we do demos here and there. So now we're starting to, everybody's starting to get a little more open to going and competing. So definitely going to be sending a few more kids out to, some of the bigger tournaments. I actually have a few students up at Ocean State Grand Nationals next week. So, look out for them there in the underbelt division, man, doing their thing.
That's awesome. I can't wait to see them. I'm going to be there. So excited to see them there. And then, so it brings me to last thing that I wanted to mention, right? And this is just kind of your opportunity to give, I guess, your send-off speech for the show, right? Yeah. And, in the spirit of everything that your dad stood for and the way that he preached about what martial arts can do for people, right? Mm-hmm. Last question is just, what has martial arts done for your life? What does it mean to you? And you can take that wherever you want to.
I'll give you this. We call ourselves Shakil warriors. Shakil is a Muslim attribute. It means the willing one. Warrior is somebody who doesn't stop, right? So the definition of a Shakil warrior is one who's willing to go beyond the stopping point. That has been the basis, the gist and the basis of my training, right? Being somebody who doesn't stop, right? One of my dad's slogans when he got sick, can't stop, won't stop, right? Being somebody that goes beyond that stopping point when everybody else says, let's turn around and go back. You say, no, we're going to keep moving forward and we're going to get to the goal, right? We're going to get to that point that we need to get to where we can't stop and we're going to keep moving forward, right? Because we don't stop moving. That's what it means to be a Shakil warrior. But we have a code too. And in that code, part of it, right? The first part, it says that I'm going to respect my parents, right? And my environment, everyone around me. The second part, it says I'm going to conduct myself in a respectful way, right? I've lived my life under those two, right? To a T, as best as anybody could, right? But the third part is where that Shakil warrior spirit comes in, right? It says, I will strive for spiritual, mental, and physical excellence in whatever I choose to do. Now, if that's not something to live your life by, you know what I mean? And not just practice martial arts. That doesn't mean I'm just gonna go and give my reverse punch and that's gonna be the best reverse punch every time, right? That I'm gonna work on it, or I'm gonna have the best kata that anybody's ever seen, right? That doesn't mean just that, right? It means that anything else that I decide to put my mind to, it doesn't matter if it's going out, right? And can you just go talk to him? It doesn't matter if it's going out and, playing basketball one day, right? Or going out and, giving a speech. I DJ, I could go out and give the best DJ set possible, right? So it doesn't matter what I'm doing. I can take what I've learned in martial arts from age of 2, right? First day I stepped on the floor. Go beyond that stopping point, right? And everybody has different stopping points, but we want to go past it every day and make ourselves better, to make ourselves better human beings, to do, like I said, leave everything and everyone better than we found it, right? So that is, that's what martial arts means to me. And it doesn't do anything if you practice martial arts just for yourself. So if you have that knowledge, right, and you have the ability to give it off, even if it's just, like I said, verbal, through mental knowledge, right? You have to give that off to the next generation because they're going to be the ones that need it, right? So, yeah.
That is, I think, unquestionably the best answer to a question that we've ever had on this podcast.
Nah, man.
There's no better way to end this show. And, you know, the number one thing I just want to say is thank you. This has been so special. You know, your dad meant so much to so many. What you continue to do for your community and for the martial arts means so much to so many. And so taking the time to share these stories and tell about these philosophies is just so special. And I, on a personal level, deeply appreciate that. And, you know, there's so much of your dad's wisdom that is evident in you. It's crazy. Like the phrases you're using, everything is like, it's almost like getting to talk to him again. You know what I mean? And it's that to me is just like the coolest thing. So again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. This has been awesome. I appreciate your friendship. Wishing you all the best. You know, like he mentioned, right? He's running the school. I see him on Instagram. He's got the DJ stuff going. So everybody tuning in, make sure you go give him some love and support on his social media. Again, Instagram @TheLifeOfKev. And again, everybody that tuned in, thank you for taking the time to enjoy this show. If you did enjoy the show, which if you tuned in, of course you did, right? Go ahead, hit that share button, share with everybody you know. Tons of great stuff throughout this podcast. If you got more questions for either of us, drop them down in those comments below. Tag us. We'd love to continue this conversation down in the comment section. And I got to imagine that we're going to have you on the show again at some point.
Oh, yeah, definitely got to do this again, man. This was real fun. I really, really appreciate it, man. Great questions, and the show's doing awesome, man. I just, I hope that we can do it again.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much. Thank you to everybody tuning in. Thank you to Black Belt Magazine for hosting the Jackson Rudolph podcast. I'm Jackson Rudolph, and this has been episode 94. I'll see you next time.